Today's episode is one that every single independent business owner needs to tap into. With the recent US election, we need to have a better understanding of what that means for small business owners everywhere. And what better person to come in and educate us than New York Times bestselling author, speaker, and America's government teacher, Sharon McMahon. I want to be clear. This episode is not about who you voted for. It's about empowering ourselves as business owners to stay informed so that we can make the best decisions for our business. And whether you are feeling nervous or optimistic, there is one thing that Sharon reminds us, and that is nobody can determine the success of your business but you. Now let's get into the episode. Welcome back, number one.
Yes.
I mean, I know it's been a crazy time for you, so we're just so thankful that you took the time to stop back again at the Independent Business Podcast to really just have a much needed conversation. So we're like, who better yet to have on than America's government teacher? So
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yes. Well, I'm really curious because, I learned about you in 2020, and I think there's a lot of us that did. And so when you look at 2020, with that election to now, even for you and your journey, how are you feeling? What major differences have you seen within these past 4 years?
Mm. These past 4 years have been challenging for everybody, mostly because of the
Mhm.
one of the biggest reasons, of course, is the pandemic.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to repeat that. Nobody's like, this was an amazing time. Like, let's make sure to
Mhm.
go through this again. How can we get a repeat? So no matter somebody's perspective on what the right thing to do during COVID was, people who were impacted. You probably
Yes.
knew people who had family that was severely impacted. It was just the whole scenario was
Yeah.
kind of a nightmare. And it was
Mm.
really challenging for small businesses too, for a variety of reasons. Like if you live in a place where you were not allowed to be, indoors without masking, or you had closures of indoor locations. Like, there were just so many aspects that were very challenging for small businesses to navigate. So
Mhm.
the 2024 election is fundamentally different in that
Mm.
it does not have the shadow of a global pandemic hanging over it. And of course, in the fall of 2020, we were like at the height of the pandemic.
Yes.
They had not invented like the treatments yet, they had not invented the vaccines yet. And so it was really like it was a very scary time for many Americans. So that's a huge difference. This
Mm.
go round is that we don't have that anymore. So that's a plus,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
No one would argue with that. No pandemic in 2024. That gets a thumbs up.
Mhm.
Um, what is challenging, I think, for small businesses to navigate at this time is how contentious this
Yes.
election has been. So
Mhm.
contentious, and there's a tremendous amount of pressure on people with a following. And for many business owners, they work to grow their social media platforms. Many
Mhm.
small business owners work to grow a personal brand in addition to their business brand. And there's pressure from outside forces to comment on political
Mhm.
things. There's pressure to comment on, like, we're voting, my business is supporting this person, or that candidate. It's difficult to know how to navigate those forces, and what the right thing to do is. And I feel like a lot of small business owners in particular, and you can tell me your perspective on this from where
Yeah.
you sit, they feel like it's a lose-lose scenario. If they say nothing, that's a lose. If they say something, that's a lose. Like, there's not a many people feel like there's not a way to win at this
Yes.
equation. How are you, what are business owners telling you?
Yeah, I think you've definitely nailed it on the head 1000%. I think there are a lot of people that are just not really sure, but
Mhm.
I will say though is that there are, like, to your point, is so contentious and a lot of people are watching. And so
Mhm.
I do think comparison from 2020 to now, some people who have voted for President-elect Donald Trump, they have been like, I was terrified of being canceled in 2020. Here is my, here now I am jumping in the open. This is who I'm voting for. Other people who have always been very open, obviously voting for Kamala Harris, have always, like, that's never changed. They've been very vocal about it, with where they align. And so I think now more than ever, though, from what I am seeing from audiences, like, in the small business realm, is that people do want to know where you
Yeah.
stand,
Yes.
regardless, whether it is, because I think a lot of us want to know where we can, spend our time, right? And like, we know that this person aligns with our values. And I think now more than ever, I mean, so what I have been seeing a lot too is threads have drastically taken off. Every
Mm.
lot of people, especially among Black women, have left
Mhm.
X to go to threads. And there's a lot of conversation right now of
Mhm.
how do we spend that time with people that we know align with our brand values. And so
Mhm.
like we can have this community, right?
Mhm.
That feels safe. And I think that's how everybody is feeling. It doesn't matter where you lie. I think everybody's trying to find a space right now where they feel safe
Mhm.
and they feel seen and they feel heard and they feel valued. And so, and I'm all for that. I think that's an amazing thing. However, I do feel like we are really missing an extremely important conversation, because as a business owner, it doesn't matter which side that you lie. You need to get political, because no matter what, I've said this so many times, that the way that the government is set up, it just does not support small business owners regardless.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I do feel like as small business owners, we need to find a middle ground here, because no matter who's in office, these policies affect us drastically.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of where I'm at. And I loved your episode, which we're absolutely going to plug that back in episode 6, at the early days of the Independent Business
Mhm.
Podcast, where you talked about small business advocacy and those types of things. And that thing is just so relevant to
Mhm.
today and
Mhm.
now. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah.
If you've seen
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah. I think
Mm,
that's really that's you bring up a couple of really good points, which is
mhm,
that the tax code and small business or and the tax code and many governmental policies um, unfairly penalize small businesses.
mhm,
They're policies that are aimed at these giant corporate international, multinational conglomerations that are
mhm,
raking in tens of billions of dollars, that have the potential to monopolize entire markets. Like, do we want one company controlling all of the supply of life-saving drugs? Like those
mhm,
are real issues that government needs to regulate and deal with. But yet, the trickle down of that to a small business who was like, listen, it is me in my living room. Okay. Like, I'm trying
mhm,
to do my taxes, and my taxes are absolutely um, incomprehensible, even to somebody who wants to do the right thing, even who's somebody who is not trying to cheat the system. Like, I'm just trying to pay what I
mhm,
owe. But it seems really, I said this in the previous episode, it seems really unfair to small business owners that people like Jeff Bezos should be taxed on $80,000 of his income only, while the rest of us
mhm.
don't have corporate structures where we're able to live off of the unrealized gains of our massive portfolios. And we're
Yeah.
paying huge amounts of money in taxes when the billionaires are not. Like
Mhm,
that is infuriating as a small business
mhm,
owner. It's infuriating that you can't call the IRS and get somebody on the phone like
mhm,
ever. Like you
mhm,
might wait on hold for 2 to 3 hours and still not talk to somebody. There's a lot of, like I have a lot of uh, beef with the system. I have a lot of beef with the system. It did not get better during the Biden administration, and it did not get
yeah.
better during the Trump administration. Guess what?
Yep.
Didn't get better during either of those administrations. So that the problem is that I don't have a lot of confidence that things are going to
Mhm,
change for the better in the short term, which is why it's important that small business owners get equipped and come
yes.
prepared to the table. That's why your work is important. That's why advocating for small businesses is important,
Mhm,
because big changes are actually not on the horizon. We are currently
mm,
living under the previous Trump tax plan.
yes.
This, like right
Mhm,
now, we are living under a tax plan that was passed in 2017, went into effect in early 2018. Our current policies are not the workings of the Biden administration, but the Biden administration also did not have the muscle on Capitol Hill in terms of what was happening in the House of Representatives, et cetera, to change
mhm,
anything. So we're currently living under the previous Trump plan. There's
mhm,
not any things on the horizon at this juncture. Now, I'm not saying that nothing will change in 4 years. I can't predict the future, but I
yep.
haven't seen any proposals that are aimed at making things easier for small businesses. And that's why, like, the resources that you provide are so important for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, when it comes to these policies, like when you're starting out as a business, it's not at the top of your list. It really isn't. I mean, and I say this
Mm-mm.
so many times where when I first started out my business, I'm just trying to get a client, right? Like
Mhm.
I literally 3 months for my mom was finally like, okay, but what about health insurance? And I was like,
Mhm.
"Oh," and just those things. And that's when I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many more things to being a small business owner that isn't very enjoyable that I don't like, but like I have to address it. And so I
Mhm.
loved even too in your past episode that just that getting involved on the local level is
Mhm.
equally just as important. And I think a lot of the times we hyper focus. I do think since 2020, and I think like I always look at too at your content. I think now people are even midterms take that equally as seriously, and also to look at locally like who's in office and what they stand for and all those different types of things. And so even for me now, like whenever I see people on the ballot, I Google, I do my research to
Yeah.
try to see like, and where do you stand in terms of small business, like advocacy, like what are you doing for me as a small business owner? That is now at the top of my list when
Yeah.
I'm looking for in a candidate. And before previously, even when I first started my business, that never was until I
Sure.
tried to get health insurance and all these different types of things. And I was like, well, this sucks.
Mhm.
And you know what I mean? And I'm like, wow, like this actually really does impact me. And so especially like now, how do you like what are things that small business owners can do to prepare, especially right now with um Biden administration, that time is coming to an end, and then the Trump administration that's going to be starting up here in
Mhm.
January.
Mhm. You bring up a really good point, and I
Mm,
wanted to just build on it very quickly, and then I want to answer
mm.
your question, which is
Yeah.
that there is more to small business advocacy than tax rates.
Yes.
Right? It is
Mm-hmm.
not just about should the tax rate be 21% or 25% or 30%. Um, the tax rate is actually only a tiny fraction of the issues that impact small businesses. Your point about health insurance is a huge one. Small business
Mm-hmm.
owners pay so much money in health insurance for themselves and their employees if they can
Mm-hmm.
even afford it, right? Like the cost of providing health insurance is truly prohibitive for many small businesses. They just are not able to even offer it as a benefit, and then they're not able
Mm-hmm.
to attract the best talent. They're forced to deal with contractors, or they're forced to have part-time workers where they don't have to offer health insurance. How do they insure themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Like my husband has had a kidney transplant, and so he will require significant amounts of medical care for the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
We, hit our deductible like in January every year. But
Mm-hmm.
as a small business owner, health insurance is a really, really important component. So when you're researching candidates, it can't just be does this candidate want low taxes? They also need to advocate for quality of life issues that impact small businesses, like health insurance. Like, can I afford to send my kids to daycare so that I can actually
Mm-hmm.
do my job? There's a variety of quality of life issues that directly impact small businesses, that people need to be looking at the big picture and not just
Yes.
what is, do they want 22% or 21% or 25%? Like, there's way more to it than just a
Mm-hmm.
percentage of tax rate on profits.
Yes.
If you have a 22% tax rate on profits instead of 21%, but you still can't buy health insurance, well, that's not actually benefiting you, right? So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, you totally understand my point that there's a lot of, this is a very multifaceted issue, and there needs to be better advocates in government for small businesses, because small businesses drive this economy.
Yes.
Okay, back to your original question,
Mm-hmm.
which was about, remind me. I
How can
just
we
I just
No,
lost the
it's
thread.
no, you're good because I actually wanted to like jump in and say that yes, and I loved how you said that it's multifaceted. And I think
Yes.
again to your point, like we really do have a specific tunnel vision when we're looking at things in regards to politics. And I think as business owners, and I think just in general, as business owners, as humans, as individuals, to really sit down and really think about like revisit your values and what is important to you so then you can make the best educated
Mhm.
decision. I think a lot of the times, to your point, that we are voting based off of emotion and all of these things, and we don't necessarily have all of the necessary information to make the best decision for
Mhm.
us. And I
Mhm.
think even, and it doesn't help, right, when you see especially with the current campaign, right? Like, I mean, the current election, I mean, it's very contentious. Emotions are high and this and that. And so I think, again, it's always checking in with yourself, grounding yourself and being like, okay, what do I value? Health insurance is important to me. Okay, maybe
Mhm.
taxes are like, obviously tax cuts are important to me. Capital, that's a big thing,
Mhm.
right? Like business owners trying
Access
to
to capital.
access
Mhm.
to capital. I mean, there's so many different things. And I think, again, checking in with yourself to really see what it is that you truly value so you can make the best decision. And so
Mhm.
the question that I had asked was, how can we as business owners, because to your point, it doesn't really, we've seen from both administrations where it hasn't really been effective for small business owners.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think this is just a good thing as things that what do we need to be looking at in order to prepare ourselves as business owners when a new administration, doesn't matter who, because I think that's something that we have to keep doing no matter what as small
Yes.
business owners.
Right.
What are the best things that we need to be looking at? How do we prepare essentially just to make sure that we are setting ourselves up for success? Because I know
Mm.
inflation is a big thing right now. And I know that conversations of terrorists have come up. And I
Yes.
mean,
Okay.
so,
Yeah.
like there's just a multitude of things of not to panic, but how do we knowledge is power. And
That's
so
right.
like how do we
How do we
prepare
prepare
no
for
matter
that?
what
Yeah.
happens? Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a great question. It's a really
Mhm,
good question. So,
mhm,
the first thing to be aware of when it comes to tariff proposals, this is something that I'm
mhm,
getting ton of questions about, is about
mhm,
the potential for tariffs. The incoming administration favors an aggressive tariff plan. Okay. And
mhm,
so, if anybody's listening to this and they don't understand what a tariff is not a tax on a foreign country, like some people may have said. It's not a tax on a foreign country. The foreign country does not pay it. A
mhm,
tariff is a tax on the importer. So if you are Walmart and you are buying toasters made in China, and you there's a tariff on goods made in China, it
mhm,
is Walmart who pays the tariff. It is not China that pays the tariff.
mhm,
And so what actually will be put into place in terms of tariffs remains to be seen. So this is not meant
mhm.
to be catastrophizing or
No.
knee jerk. The sky is
Mhm,
falling. As you mentioned, information is power, and
mhm,
being prepared for a worst case scenario is much better than being unprepared for a worst case scenario. The best thing that can
mhm,
happen then is you're pleasantly surprised when the worst case scenario didn't happen, right?
mhm,
And so some of the proposals that have been floated from the new incoming administration are proposing very, very sizable tariffs on incoming goods, specifically from countries like China, which we know is where a very large percentage of goods that come into the United States are made. So if
mhm,
somebody is relying on either raw materials or finished products that are made overseas, people should be preparing themselves for the potential of a fairly significant increase in the cost of goods. And
mhm,
that's different than an increase in tax rates. And this is how
mhm,
it might impact businesses differently. So an increase in tax rates, which again, there's not currently a proposal for an increase in tax rates, but I just want to
mhm,
illustrate the difference. If
mhm,
somebody increases corporate tax rates, you might be paying a higher percentage on your profits.
mhm,
And that is different than you having a greatly increased cost of goods, right? If I own an ice cream parlor and I'm paying $3 a gallon for ice cream, and my cost of goods goes up to $10 a gallon for ice cream, that is a cost that the cost of inputs, what it takes to make your product, your ice cream
mhm,
cones, that
mhm,
is going to be passed on directly to consumers. It's going to have to be passed on directly to consumers. But what that means for businesses is it's absolutely going to impact your strategic planning. How much is it
yes.
going to cost us to buy a pallet of something from our normal overseas supplier? If this applies to you, that potential, the cost of that could be dramatically increased,
Mhm,
especially if what you're importing comes from China. So that's something that small businesses need to be aware of when they're doing their 2025 strategic planning. People have asked me, do presidents have the right to enact tariffs without the approval of Congress? And in some cases, in many cases, in fact, yes, they do. And that is because
mhm,
Congress has delegated that authority to the president. If the
mhm,
president can make the case that A tariff is needed for the good of national security, which, when we're
Mm,
talking about somebody who is both a very large trading partner, but also a foreign military adversary, like
mhm,
China is, it's actually pretty easy to make the case that that tariffs are needed for national security. Now, you might not agree with that, but what I'm saying is
mhm,
that it's easy for a president who wants to enact tariffs to make that case. I'm putting tariffs on on these goods because it is important for national
mhm,
security that we pull back our dependence on Chinese goods. The
mm,
point of tariffs, if anybody doesn't is not familiar with this, and I would imagine there's a small, perhaps subset of your listeners who are not familiar with this, the point of a tariff is to disincentivize businesses from doing business with overseas trading partners and to
mm,
shift their production to domestic means.
mm,
Um, and s- and so in the past, there have been varying degrees of success with that proposal. We have
mm.
some tariffs now, by the way.
Yeah.
We're not starting at ground zero with tariffs. We do
Mm,
protect certain industries in the United
mm,
States by putting tariffs on incoming goods from other countries on certain products, things
mhm,
like steel, for example.
mm,
We
mhm,
we protect the American steel industry by putting tariffs on foreign steel, so that companies
mm,
who want to build things are more incentivized to buy it in the United States. The
mhm,
difference here, though, is that we already have a domestic steel industry, right?
mm,
We already
mm,
know how to make steel in the United States. We have steel mills, we have the raw materials, we mine the raw materials here in Minnesota.
mhm,
And then our shipping industry puts them on a boat to go down the Great Lakes to the steel mills of Pittsburgh, right? So
mhm,
we have a domestic steel industry. What we have less of is the ability to produce things like electronics. We
mm.
don't have a
Yep.
domestic electronics industry anymore, for example. So, this will impact different businesses differently. I cannot have
Yes.
one blanket pronouncement, but it's just something to be aware of, that if you buy anything, you buy at retail even, there's a good chance that the price of those things is going to go up if it
Mhm.
is made overseas, which is a very large percentage of products in the United States. So,
Exactly.
yep,
Yep. Yes, and I was thinking too of like, okay, like client gifts, right? Like
yep,
well, number one, if you're a product-based business, right, this could potentially, and again, not to fear anybody, it's just like, okay, now we just prepare. We look to see, we do that financial forecasting of
yep,
what are things going to look like in our business this year. Do things need to be put over here? Do I need to spend more time here, or what are the ways can I, include additional revenue streams in my business, right? Like that's being
mhm,
strategic, or like again, if you're a service-based business and you're like, okay, like client gifts that might go up more, right? Or however, especially if you do more customized gifts, like there's so many different ways that this can affect you. Like if you need to purchase a laptop, if you need to
mhm.
purchase additional equipment that's going to make sure that you're able to efficiently run your business, right?
That's
Again,
right.
do that forecasting in your business. I think this is the perfect time to do that as we are in Q4, and just so you can look at the data, so you can make these strategic decisions. And I think
Mhm,
again, like educating yourself, and I think too, to your point of um even what you just said earlier, like I think again, going even too locally of how these things can truly, truly, truly impact you. And so I
mhm,
even love that
mhm,
you broke that down with what a tariff is, because I'm like, oh yeah, that really can affect all aspects of our business in ways that we
mhm,
just didn't even really think of. And I think to your point of just like taking that time and really just looking at your numbers, looking at the data, looking at what you have coming up in your business, and
mhm.
just strategically plan accordingly. And if things are much better than you anticipated, great. Like, but
Great.
at least as long at the end of the day, you're not losing sleep over it. And that's, I
That's
think,
right.
the most important thing.
That's right. It's much better to prepare than to be caught unaware. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that might mean, depending on what your business looks like, that might mean making strategic investments now at the end of
Yes.
Q4
Mm-hmm.
before any potential tariffs would be enacted. I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
about of a photographer, for example, who has been eyeing a new camera system. Those are almost everything related to camera gear is made
Mm-hmm.
overseas. And so, what might that do to the prices of a new lens or a new camera
Mm-hmm.
body or something like that, moving forward into the middle part of 2025? I
Mm-hmm.
can't tell you what that will look like at this point, but If the proposals that are currently on the table move forward, that could look like a fairly significant increase in the cost of purchasing an electronic, for example,
Mhm.
next year. So if a small business is doing that strategic planning and is thinking about like, well, I do have this little chunk of change, like at the end of the year, this might be a good time to reinvest some of your profits
Yes.
rather than just taking them as profit and then paying taxes on them. This might be
Mhm.
a good time to reinvest those profits in your business. Hopefully, your business has been profitable, um, and sort of uh, taking stock of what that might look like next year. Either maybe it's pre-buying things now that you know for sure you're going to use, making an
Mhm.
investment in like new equipment that you were thinking maybe I'll buy next year, but maybe actually be better from a tax perspective, from a business perspective to buy it now. These are just things to weigh when a small business
Yes.
owner is planning strategically.
Yes, I love that so much, and I think even now, like, even just having this conversation with a lot of the education that you have provided, it just I feel more at ease, and it's like, "All right, like, we just gotta sit down and strategize and make the time," right? And I think,
Mhm.
again, like, I think a lot of us as small business owners, we are going to be okay, like, no matter what, no matter who is in office, I think that's the main thing as well, is that I think I wanted people to take away from this episode is no matter who is in office, you as a small business owner, you have the power. You have the power. And so things are going to be okay no matter who's in office, right? Like you're
Mhm.
passionate about what it is that you do. You know you can do it. So at the end of the day, just take the time and create a plan and do what you need to do. And so that's like I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful and
Mhm.
I'm like okay, like this isn't things are going to be okay. And so a thing that I would love to talk about is how can we as business owners, I think as a whole, just because I'm guilty of this too. I'm gonna be real. Because for me, I align myself with brands whose values I align with and stuff like that. And but I do think as small business owners, we really do need to have some form of comfort. You know what I mean? Just where we can just see, you know what I mean? I think because the conversations are happening behind closed doors. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I'm not gonna lie. They'll be like, "Oh my god, this person supports this person." Like, I'm not messing with you, and I'm guilty of it too. I'm not gonna
Mhm.
lie.
Mhm.
You know
Mhm.
what I mean? I
Mhm.
do that, and so, and a lot of people do, and there are other people who say like, "Oh, like." We can agree, disagree politically, and still be friends and stuff like that. And I think for some people that could be triggering, right? Because I think for a lot of what was on the table this election, and
Mhm.
so again, we're a small bit. How can we just start having some conversations? I think more so is what I wanted to ask.
Mm. Yeah. I think to your point about we're going to be okay,
Mhm.
even if the person we did not prefer got elected, and
Mhm.
even if the person we did prefer did.
Mhm.
Why? Because our success is not dependent on who
Yes.
is in the White House. You
Mhm.
don't have a successful business today because of Joseph Biden.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Nor did you have a successful business in 2019 because of Donald Trump. Your
Mhm.
success is not dependent on who is in the White House. So I think that is a really important thing for all of us to remember, no matter our feelings about who got elected, whether we're excited, whether we're feeling a sense of impending dread. Your success in 2018, 2019 was not dependent on Trump, and your success in 2024 was not dependent on Biden. And we need to
Mm.
remember that. Your success
Yes.
is dependent on you. So, and you are the person you can control. Right. So that actually is good news. That's good news
Mhm.
for all of us that we do not need to sit around waiting for some president to fix it for us. Anybody who is going to try to ride in on a white horse and be like, I have the plan, follow me, that person always wants to be a dictator. We are
Mhm.
the plan. The plan is not who's in the White House. The plan is us. So I
Mhm.
take comfort in knowing that the plan
Mhm.
is us. I don't need to be dependent on the whims of who lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I'm dependent on myself and I can adjust my own sails. So I
Mhm.
think that's absolutely worth remembering. Like your success is not dependent on who occupies the White House. In terms of like, how can small business owners um, deal with these issues of like, how do we find like-minded community? How do we
Mhm.
find people, our customers that align with our values? Because
Mhm.
we all want to do business with people who align with our values.
Yes.
Honestly, like that makes our lives easier. If we
Mhm.
if we align on
Yeah.
values, it allows us to attract our ideal client. And so
Mhm.
I'm not saying that I don't think it's wise to have your entire Instagram feed be um, ugly pictures of the candidate you didn't like. Like,
Mhm.
we hated that person. Look at, here's an
Mhm.
ugly picture of that person. That's not smart business. But I do think it's up to each individual business how they want to conduct themselves. But I think there's ways to communicate your values that don't necessarily go so far as to say, please vote for XYZ person. The
Mhm.
right people will pick up on the values that you are communicating, and perhaps the wrong people will be repelled. And honestly, repelling the wrong customers is part of your job as a small
Mhm.
business owner. You cannot attract everybody. That's actually a bad idea to attract everybody.
Mhm.
Even Disney World repels the wrong customers, right?
Mhm.
We're going to communicate what you can expect here, what our values are as this giant company, and what kind of experience you're going to have with us. And for some people, that's not going to be a fit. And
Mhm.
that actually is good. You can't accommodate
Mhm.
can you cut everyone in the world's hair? No,
Mm.
that's stupid to even think that, right? Like
Mhm.
everyone's not your customer. So I
Mhm.
think there's a way for business owners to communicate what their values are without
Mhm.
necessarily uh, overtly alienating people who maybe are not quite on the same page as you.
Yeah.
There and also while repelling people who you're like, I absolutely would not want to do business with them, right?
Mhm.
Like, don't try to come up in my business with your Nazi flag. That's
Yeah.
not going to work here. Right?
Mhm.
It's not going to
Yeah.
work here. So we're not doing that. We want to
Mhm.
repel the wrong people from our business, and
Mhm.
that the way that you communicate that is going to depend completely on your industry. It really is.
Mhm.
There is not a blanket pronouncement that I can't tell you how somebody who does hair should communicate versus how somebody who owns a boutique should communicate it. But it
Mhm.
can be communicated via the types of products you carry. You can have
Mhm.
state value statements and say, we really believe in supporting local businesses that, treat their animals humanely if you run a restaurant, or, like there are many ways to communicate your values without just posting pictures of candidates and like thumbs up and thumbs down. And those serve to repel the wrong people and attract the right people.
Mhm.
I'd love to hear from you. Like,
Mhm.
how are successful small businesses best navigating this from the conversations you've been having?
Um, I think a lot of the private conversations that I have been having are it's like, you'll see somebody who endorses a certain candidate that you just don't agree with. And I think a lot of us are like, some of us, not everybody, but you're like, okay, noted. Like, I'm not mad, but now I just know I'm not doing business with you. Like, even
Mm-hmm.
collaboration, right? Like, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Where I'm kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, okay. And so, but also on the other end of that, it's still, but not in a mean way of like, okay, but it's just like, hey, like, I'll still treat you with respect, love you from afar, but like obviously we just don't align. And I want to make sure that I have a community that upholds this values that doesn't necessarily lean towards your values, and like that's okay. You know what I mean? But I
Mm-hmm.
do think that no matter what, we have a lot of events where business owners from all walks of life and space and political beliefs and all these different things will like we all gather in some capacity,
Mm-hmm.
no matter
Mm-hmm.
whether you think you do or not. And so I just am like, how, I think sometimes and of course, naturally, politics, like it's just a very contentious topic. So people try to stay away from it. But then it's like, okay, but every 4 years, we're back at it again. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? So I'm kind of like, well, how do we just start having some types of conversations where people are still honored, not disrespected or feeling unsafe, but still honored? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the hard part,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
it is. It is.
Yeah.
There's a difference between we don't align and maybe I'm not going to shop with you anymore, and you just like are, like, I see where you're coming from. That does
Yeah.
not fit for me. Best of
Yep.
luck to you, though. There's a difference between that and intentionally trying to harm someone else's livelihood, right?
Yes. Yep.
A
Mhm.
difference between that and like torpedoing their business on purpose.
Mhm.
That actually is not going to attract people to your political views. If your
Yeah.
goal is to try to say, like, these are my values, I think these kind of people should be elected. I don't align with values that say A, B, and C. Um, Intentionally harming people whose values
Mhm.
are A, B, and C actually does not make them want to vote for your candidate more. Right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing to keep in mind too is like, what is my ultimate goal here? Is my ultimate goal to move the needle on childhood poverty? Is my ultimate goal to get,
Mhm.
fill in the blank person elected? Is my ultimate goal to help make sure that small business owners can have health insurance? Figuring out what your goal is makes a huge difference here, right? Because if your
Mhm.
goal is to get certain types of candidates elected, and that's a big value for you,
Mhm.
then you need to consider what kinds of actions will help do that thing. And
Mhm.
often, if your goal is to, like, we need more people to rally around this cause, you need to build a bigger tent, not a
Mhm.
smaller tent. And sometimes that is, and again, I think it's up to each individual business owner how they want to play this. But the idea of bigger tent is one that can sometimes feel unsafe to people, right? Like, I don't
Mm.
want people in my tent who believe things that are really antithetical to my beliefs. I don't want people in my tent who have what I think are dangerous ideas.
Mhm.
And what I would say to that person is there's a difference between come live in my house, come sleep in my bed. There's a difference
Mhm.
between that and I can collaborate with you on an issue that we both believe is important. That
Mm.
sort of consensus building, that type of coalition building is actually how most important things get done in the United States. That is how the
Yeah.
civil rights movement happened. That is
Mhm.
how we got the Voting Rights Act, how we got the Civil Rights Act, how we got the, how we got housing rights in the United States.
Mhm.
Coalition building. It does not mean that people align on every value. It does not mean
Mhm.
that they attend the same church. It does not mean that they spend their money in the same way. But where they could align was everyone should have equal access to the ballot in this country,
Mhm.
even if
Mhm.
we don't agree over here on the margins. That type of
Mhm.
consensus building is how important things get done. So I would
Mhm.
I would encourage people who are thinking about this issue, and I know that people who are listening to this are the thinking kind of people. They want to consider all of the angles. I would
Mhm.
encourage people to think about what it looks like to build coalitions and to build
Mm.
consensus. This is how women got the right to vote in the United States. This is how
Mhm.
Black women organized to help get the right to vote in the South in the 1960s. Is they
Mhm.
built coalitions, sometimes with people that had other bad ideas.
Mm.
It did not mean find people who have 100% of the same ideas as you. It meant find people with whom you can work on a topic that is near and dear to your heart and move the needle on that topic. And then we can focus on the next thing together. When
Mm.
we sit around waiting for everyone to align on everything, that is how we get stalemates. That is how we get the least productive Congress in the United States' history, which is what
Mhm.
the 200 or the 117th, I'm sorry, which is what the 118th Congress, the current sitting Congress, has been the least
Mhm.
productive Congress in United States history. That is what it looks like when we don't build coalitions, when we
Mhm.
don't find consensus, and we wait to align on 100% of values. Nothing good happens from that. So that's just one thing to just sort of like add to the list of things for small business owners to think about.
Mhm.
um, is how can I what are my goals, and
Mhm.
how can I help move the needle on that goal? Because we can't do everything.
Yep.
As like, we can't run all the businesses, we can't carry all the
Mhm.
products, we can't serve all the customers, nor can we achieve every political goal. What issues are the most important to me, and how do I help move the needle on those issues? You can probably work with people who you disagree with on an issue like veteran homelessness, right?
Mhm.
People from both sides of the aisle can come together on that topic and move the needle for homeless veterans. That doesn't mean we have to agree on everything else. If we will only, however, work with people with whom we 100% align, guess what? The veterans are still homeless at the end of the day. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to consider the broader sort of picture here. And I'm not giving a prescription of what to do. I'm just saying, consider this in your decision calculus. What are my goals? How do I help build a bigger tent to meet those goals?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love that so much because it's so true. I mean, no matter at the end of the day who you vote for, we're all still a business owner at the end of the day. And a lot of these things affect us all. So
Hmm.
it's like, I love how you said that it's a coalition, right? Like,
Hmm.
and I think even for me, I'm like, okay, like having even and if you're listening to this, just, having some sort of empathy, I think, as well is right. And then but you don't have to agree on everything. But as business owners, we have to be able to move things forward so that the government, the policies that are in place can better support us as
Hmm.
business
Hmm.
owners. And so
Hmm.
we have to make sure that we are continuing moving that forward. And that means like you getting involved locally, you really making sure that you are having these conversations so that you can learn more, right? Leaning from a place of curiosity. And so I love that you just shared that because it's just such a good reminder of like this, that is truly how you do move things
Hmm.
forward.
Hmm.
And this conversation has been absolutely amazing. And so I even want to pivot really quick because your book, like, I mean, you're on a book tour
Hmm.
right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think just even everything that we've talked about today, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like your book is just so important about like talking about these unsung heroes. Like there's so many people who have
Hmm.
made such huge impact that
Hmm.
we do not know. Even some of, yes, the infrastructure that we have isn't the best for small business owners, but there's somebody who fought to have
That's
what
right.
we have right now for business owners. And so
Mm.
I just want to talk about really quickly just about your book and what
Mm.
truly inspired you, especially like now out of everything that we've talked about today. What inspired you to write it?
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. The book is called The
Yeah.
Small and the Mighty,
Mm,
12 Unsung Americans Who
mm,
Changed the Course of History. And man, if that does not describe so many small business owners, right?
mhm,
They often are unsung. And they often do such big things in their communities that
mhm,
change the course of history of their communities. We don't always
mhm,
we think about history as being like this big giant arc of like world history or American history,
mm,
when in reality the history of your community is part of US history too, right? So one of
mhm,
the reasons I was inspired to write it was because I keep hearing from people that they feel like they're, who they are is not enough, that
mm,
who they are is not big enough, that they live a quiet life, that they just want to cut people's hair, that they just want to take some people's pictures, that they just want to own their little store and raise their kids. And that is not big enough to move the needle on world history. They don't have the family money or the name or the connections or the elected office. And it seems like who I am is not enough. And it's easy, if that's your viewpoint, it's easy to feel hopeless. It's easy to feel
mm.
like nothing I ever do is going to be enough. And this book, which by the way, I just found out this morning, was named by Amazon editors as one of the best 5 books of the year. Which is like, that is insane. Thank
Yes.
you.
Oh,
Yes.
amazing.
Yes, it
Yes.
was on. I did not know this. It was on CBS this morning, and Gail King, is on on
She
the
called
couch.
your book.
She's like, "I love this cover. I love this cover. This is a good cover." Gail King said. So I was like, "Amazing, love it. I love to
Yes.
hear it." Yes. So I mean, the idea that this is a message that we all need. Not only is it
Mm,
interesting to read, it is a page turner, but my
mm,
goal is for you to close the last page of the book and know that the small in this country truly are the mighty. And that
mm,
great Americans are not just people of the past whose faces are in black and white pictures or in an oil
mhm,
painting, that great Americans live. Right. And the good
mm,
news is that you do not need to wait for an invitation. You can just decide to be one of them. And
mm,
the stories in this book help sort of illuminate the way. How have people in our past made a way in the wilderness for us? And this applies equally on a personal level, but also for small business owners. Many people in this book owned their own small businesses that changed their communities for the better. In fact, the first woman profiled in the book, her name is Claire Brown. She
Mhm.
was a formerly enslaved person who started a small business. I even say in the book, she should be in the dictionary as, her picture should be next to the phrase self made. And I love the idea that she was somebody who was self-made, and what she chooses to do um, with her self-made money is truly
Mhm.
remarkable.
Mm. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh,
So
I
anyway,
love.
thanks for asking. I am really proud of it.
Oh my gosh, yes, and I'm definitely going to get it now. Like,
Thank you.
but I just love the way that you laid it out because it's so true. Like the impact that is made are in those smaller moments, right? That
Yes.
like that you just don't see. Like what what we consider the most mundane. That's where the biggest change lies. And I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
again, I think it just reminds us is that you are more than enough and you can make an impact where you are now.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so that's just that I just have all the feels. Like thank
Mm,
you so much for sharing that. And also and
mm.
congratulations. Like that is
Thank you.
phenomenal.
Thank you.
And so for every single question that we ask, like I'm sure as you remember, what do you think is the biggest differentiator between the businesses that succeed and the ones that fail?
Mm. Great question. And there's many different answers, but I think for me, it's like venture capitalists don't invest in
Mhm.
ideas, they invest in people, right?
Mm,
And the same is
mhm,
true of like, what is the difference maker between a small business that succeeds and one that fails? It is the person that runs it.
mm.
And the good news is you have control over that.
Yes. Oh my gosh,
Mm.
kept it short and sweet too.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you
Yes,
so
thank
much for
you.
this conversation. This has just
Yes.
been, I think, I needed this. I think so many business owners, I think a lot of us needed this because, a lot of us are some of us are happy. Like, I think there's just a
Yeah,
wide variety of emotions, and I think this
totally.
episode, I think all of us are gonna be collectively feeling the same thing, which I think is just
Thank
what's
you.
so needed right now for us to be able to move forward as business owners and truly make an impact in our communities and for entrepreneurs as a whole. And so, for people that wanna connect with you, where can they find you? How can we
Mm.
continue to support you?
Thank you. Yes, you can
Yes.
follow me on Instagram at Sharon Says So, but you can also just go to my website, SharonMcMahon.com, and linked
Mhm.
there is my podcast and my newsletter, my book, my social media. It's all just on my website.
Awesome. Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Sharon, and for
Thank
everybody
you. Thanks for having
listening.
me.
Absolutely. And everybody
Mm.
listening, until next time.